I've got plenty of attending peace for are you a school?
Hi everyone, this is Doug Melia and I'm your host for the Same Kit Different Day podcast, and today I've got with me Jordan Wylie. Jordan, how are you?
Very good, thank you. How's it going, Doug?
Yeah, good, not bad at all. Which end of the country are you in today?
I am in sunny Hampshire, down in the southwest of England.
Oh, excellent. Everywhere's sunny today. I'm at home, so St Anne's not so far from your hometown.
Yeah, back up in Blackpool. Yeah, that's my real home, back up in Lancashire.
Back in Stanley Park.
Yeah, exactly.
So, obviously we've been friends for a long time, and I wonder if you could just tell our listeners about how we first met and sort of what our first involvement was.
Yeah, no problem at all. So yeah, I think for me, I joined the army at a very young age at 16, and then I had sort of 4 or 5 years in the army, and then I left for a short period. In that time, I was looking for sort of new opportunities, and I came across your business, and you had obviously an excellent reputation around the country for delivering different types of training, ranging from conflict management to control and restraint, close protection, the martial arts, and so it was really interesting for me because it gave me a different insight into certainly how we manage risk. And normally as a soldier, when you think of risk, you think of the physical aspects of maybe holding a weapon and firing a gun, whereas actually, what I learned from working with you in your side of the business were actually, it sort of reshaped my thinking, because it taught me that actually good security, good risk management is actually done with your head, not necessarily with force as such. So that's how we met, and I obviously spent a couple of years working with, spent probably about a year working with you, and then decided that I was going to rejoin back to the army.
I remember that. I remember the day you said it. Yeah. So what made you go back in, apart from working for me?
Yeah. Apart from working for you for a year, which sent me over the edge. No, it was for me. I think when you've been in the military system, I think, and then you come out of it, one thing you lose is that sense of sort of belonging and pride and purpose. Yeah. I think from going from somebody who's wearing the Queen's uniform, wearing your medals, polishing your boots, and I think a lot of soldiers, you take that for granted when you're doing it, and you see it sometimes, if I dare say, a bit of an inconvenience and a bit of a pain in the backside sometimes. But actually, when you lose that, you really miss it, and it's the old saying of you don't know what you've got till it's gone, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And going from being in uniform to being in a tracksuit some days, working in schools with kids, it's a massive contrast, isn't it?
It is a massive contrast, but also, it taught me lots of different things. And actually, even though I went back to the army and then did another short career there of 5 years, actually working, and not so much working, but working with or volunteering and helping children and young people is something that is really important to me right now today. And that probably started when I was working with you, and you worked with a lot of sort of disadvantaged children, people who were maybe easily led off the rails and needed that sort of nudge onto the straight and narrow. And so actually it's gone full circle, because although I'm working with children, it's in a different context, but it's certainly those skills that I learned working with people like yourself are invaluable in understanding young people and how they think and how they work.
Yeah, people are people wherever they are, aren't they? So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the charity that you're involved in. You're building a school, is that right?
Yeah, so we volunteer. I'm a volunteer trustee, and we're trying to build a school for children on the Horn of Africa in a little country called Djibouti, which has got lots of refugees there that have been displaced by the war in Yemen and the conflict in Somalia. So I think as a former soldier, when you've seen the sort of hardships that children face firsthand, it gives you a real perspective on life. And I go into schools in the UK, and I try to share the journey of these children overseas, and try to almost sort of embed a sense of gratitude, because even though we might not have the greatest lives, we have a lot better lives than most people, and so do our children.
Yeah, the lockdowns brought a lot of that about. I think that's a really good way of explaining to the kids sort of just where on the scale what we're going through sits when you compare it to some of the war-torn countries and the childhoods that these other kids are having.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm just been working on a document, ironically, before we started this podcast, and I'm looking at how COVID-19 is affecting the children and the sort of populations in Somalia and Djibouti, and And it just made me think that, we're worrying about this, but actually they're still in the middle of a war zone with bombs being dropped every day, and they're still having to worry about the thing that we think is the most important thing in the world, this COVID-19. So it does give you perspective on life. And we're sat at home, most of us, with our loved ones. We're getting 3 meals a day still, and even though we've had a lot of instability with jobs and we don't know what's coming next, we're still better off than probably about 90% of the world.
Yeah, exactly. So we had a conference lined up, and although the idea of my podcast is to interview people around the use of the kit, and that's where the sort of same kit different day came from, it became a bit ironic that it is like the same shit different day for everyone stuck in lockdown now.
Yeah.
So I've been speaking to a lot of people that were lined up to speak at our conference. So just to sort of pull it back in, one of the things I wanted you to talk about at the conference was what your memories are of when you were in the military and you had to work with detainees, because the conference was going to be about use of force, and we had a lot of different specialists. And I always wanted to speak to someone around the military aspects of detention, containment, and even possibly interrogation.
Yeah, so it was, it's a long time ago, but it was actually 15 years ago this week.
Oh, right.
That I was, 15 years ago this week. So tragically, actually, the only reason I remember that is because we lost a very good friend of ours on the 29th of May, and we've just been talking to some of the guys who were sort of on patrol when this particular incident happened which is next Friday. We lost Corporal Brackenbury, who was a young 21-year-old lad from Yorkshire, from a place called Goole, and he was a great friend of ours. So it's ironic, but 15 years ago right now, literally, I was sat in Iraq in a place called Al-Amara in the Maysan province, which is on the Iraq-Iran border, and it was. People may not remember the name Al-Amara, but they will know. A lot of people remember some of the battles that took place there, because, for example, the Victoria Cross and lots of military crosses were given out in 2004 from the incidents that took place in Al-Amara. You may remember the 6 Royal Military Police that were slaughtered in 2003. That was just south of Al-Amara. So there was a lot of activity in Al-Amara. It was a pretty brutal place 15, 16 years ago today, and you know what? Yeah, the role that I got sent out there to do, which was not my sort of primary role in the army, but I volunteered for doing some courses, and I ended up working in intelligence. And my role was an intelligence operator, and I was there to. My primary role on that tour was to collate intelligence, gather information, process it, and then disseminate it to sort of senior commanders, tactical decision makers. Yeah. One of my secondary roles, I trained at the Defence Intelligence Centre in a place called Chicksands in Bedfordshire, and I was trained as what they call a prisoner handler and a tactical questioner, which meant essentially that when we would capture prisoners or suspected terrorists who were responsible for making things like the improvised explosive devices or snipers taking shots at British patrols, when we caught these people, then we sort of put them through a process, and we would have to detain them. We would have to then take them into a sort of detention centre, which would be part of our army camp, a military camp, and then. We would often, because unless we would have interpreters with us, we would also, what was interesting at the time, I always remember thinking, is we would have a human rights sort of neutral sort of expert with us who'd be there. It was interesting for me, because even though these were normally, the people that I was dealing with were normally, people who were known terrorists, they were bad people, they'd had the blood of British or coalition, they had blood on their hands of good people. And so for me, I always remember it being really tough, because, we were obviously ethical and we had to do everything as we were guided and by the rules and regulations, although there were lots of stories in Iraq, as made the mainstream media, of things like torture and abuse of prisoners from Americans and British. I don't know. A lot
of those photographs were fake, though, I would like to add.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the challenges at the time. I remember the backlash of that, because I think it was, I can't remember the newspaper, but it was obviously what Piers Morgan was responsible for at the time. He published these papers, News of the World or the Mirror or something like that, and it was all fabricated photos of coalition forces that didn't actually happen. And the problem for us on the ground, because that was exactly in 2005 actually, and what happened was that people started attacking more patrols in response to what they thought were real photographs, and the political implications were huge at the time, and I have no doubt and that people probably got injured, perhaps even got killed as a result of the actions of those newspapers that published those photos. It was pretty tragic, really, but. Yeah, but our job was to process prisoners. So we would we would bring them in, you know, and we would put them in a room. But I always, as I say, I always remember the irony for me was that we always had somebody watching over us, and sometimes I felt that we even, you know, dare I say, even treated the prisoners better than some of the soldiers were getting treated in our own camp in terms of, you know, we had to give them water every hour, we had to feed them when they were hungry. You know, we couldn't just go and get food and water if we were hungry, but yet we would have to be giving them anything they wanted. And I always remember thinking this is crazy, because these are people who are murderers, really. So you know, not that I was an expert in detainee handling, but I'd done a course for probably 3 or 4 weeks before I went there. And but yeah, it was tactical questioning, really, to try and extract information from these people. You know, we weren't allowed to do any of the things that you see in the movies, putting them in stress positions or waterboarding or any of these sort of things that you might see on films. It certainly wasn't my experience of being a detainee handler.
So that's great. It's great to hear that perspective, because all we have is what's out there from the mainstream media. And like you say, there's blood on the mainstream media's hands almost from causing the further attacks to happen. Now, the human rights, I'm a member of the International Correction and Prisons Association, and just I like reading about the different perspectives. And one of the things I always come back to is this idea of correcting people and treating people. But from a military point of view, it's not about that. Like you said, it's about gathering intelligence and information from these people. And there's a lot to be said that if you treat anyone really badly, they'll tell you what you want anyway. They'll probably make something up to get out of the situation.
Yeah, I think so. I think absolutely. I think, you know, not that I've ever experienced it or seen it, but absolutely, if you're going to torture somebody, if you're going to hurt somebody and cause them physical harm, they will tell you whatever you want to hear. I have no doubt. You know, there is a huge psychological aspect of it, and I think my more recent experience of, although it's not dealing with prisoners as such, but certainly in terms of tactical questioning or interrogation in its lightest form, would be working on the Channel 4 show Hunted, where we go and speak to, you know, we go and speak to a fugitive's family member, and for example, we might pull on the old psychological levers and say, okay, if you're not going to tell us, then we'll start searching your house and pulling up your floorboards, and all of a sudden they'll tell us because they don't want that to happen. You know, so there is a massive psychological aspect into any form of questioning, and not just in a prisoner context, but even in a job interview. You know, whatever it might be, psychology is a huge part of that, I think.
Definitely, yeah. So, what have you learned from working on Channel 4 Hunted? Has it been enjoyable?
It's been great fun. What have I learned? I would say that one of the interesting things I've learned, or probably the comical things I've learned, is that if you dig hard enough into someone's life, everyone's got a skeleton that they don't want you to find.
I can believe in that. I can definitely believe in that. I mean, and those skeletons do come out every now and again. I know I'm quite active on social media. And we had a chat recently about sort of dealing with trolls and dealing with people who don't like that people have climbed and done well for themselves and things like that. And one of the best things you sort of said to me was, if a troll calls you out on something, then just say to them either yes or no, and just answer them, rather than sort of panicking about it, hiding about it, and letting it eat you up inside.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that I learned from somebody who shared advice with me. And actually, you know, whether it's a bully or a troll online, but certainly in the social media context, if somebody wants to try and call you out because you've made a mistake, you know, that they feel powerful and they feel that they've got some kind of hold over you. And the moment that the only way you can take that away is by acknowledging it. And actually, when you acknowledge it and say, you know what, I made a mistake, and I'll own my mistake, and I'll hold my hand up, I'm not perfect. And straight away, you've removed the power from them, because they've got nothing on you anymore. You publicly acknowledge what you've done wrong. And yeah, you know, it might be embarrassing for the short term, but actually, I think you gain a lot more respect for having the integrity to own up when you've done something wrong, or you know, been said the wrong thing, or tweeted something that's inappropriate. You know, we all make mistakes, and that's the only way we learn, I think.
Yeah, and to try and put it from that social world into the real world, because like the people that like you are walking past giving you the thumbs up, or the people that are laughing your jokes are doing the crying faces. Well, like, if somebody pointed at you in the street and called you out for something, you'd have a chat with them, and you'd say, "Oh, sorry you feel like that. Yeah, that was what happened, or that was," and it'd go away. But when translate that into two people sat behind a keyboard, you don't know who it is, you don't know how many of them there are, and it does give you that fear. And I think if people can try and put it right, if this was real life, what would I do? I think it might be easier to deal with.
Yeah, I think so. But I guess at the same time, I think you wouldn't even have these problems, because they're normally, these bullies, these trolls, they're faceless, they're cowards. That is the only power they have, to sit behind a keyboard. And in reality, I've always been quite affected by even the sort of one or two negative comments where a lot of people can just bat it off, water off a duck's back. So
I'm the same, mate. Yeah, I go through my feedback forms. If I get a 9, I'm phoning them up.
Yes, I'm the same. And I think it's because you try and have the highest of standards in everything you do. I think we're the same in that you whatever you do, you want to be the best at. You believe in striving for excellence, and so it's quite disheartening and quite tough when you get things wrong. But it is the only way you learn. If you do everything right all the time, you don't really get anything from that ultimately.
No. So how was it? Your last expedition was cut a bit short, and you had to modify it and sort of do a COVID-19 version.
Yeah. So this year I'm doing an expedition, an adventure called Running Dangerously, the Polar Edition, which transpires from an expedition I did 2 years ago, which was the initial original Running Dangerously, which was to run sort of long distance endurance races in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. And the next one, or the current one, is the polar version. So my challenge was to run a marathon in the 10 coldest places on Earth. So it started really well. In January, I went to Siberia in Russia, and then I went to the Yukon in Canada, Alaska in the USA, and went to Iceland. And then I was literally on my way to the North Pole, to the top of the Earth. And then, the COVID-19 sort of pandemic struck, and I was literally in a taxi, and we had to turn around, and that was it. We were going into lockdown. So I had a couple of days before the sort of the full lockdown, you can't leave your house, started. So I
remember, and you were quite innovative, weren't you?
Yeah, try to be creative, innovative, and I think that's one of the important things when you're fundraising. With respect to everyone, but a lot of people have climbed a mountain, jumped out of a plane, or ran a marathon. So you have to do things differently if you want to get that media attention. You want to generate the donors, the sponsors. So I always try to sort of think outside the box when it's fundraising wise. And so I spoke to a few friends, and I was offered a cryo chamber, so a sort of an ice chamber in Poole. In Dorset, and we stuck a treadmill in there, and we ran the first ever marathon on a treadmill in a cryo chamber. So it actually wasn't physically as tough as probably the marathons, but I think psychologically to run in a little box on a treadmill, with a little window to see through was quite tough. It took a lot longer than probably a normal marathon. It took 6 or 7 hours, and the treadmill was freezing up with the cold temperature. We got it down to minus 100 for the last kilometre, so it was pretty chilly in there.
That's excellent. So what's next? What's next on your agenda then?
So at the moment, a lot of I faced a lot of the challenges like everyone else. So all my filming this year, I was quite disappointing, but I'm still healthy, I'm still alive. But I had 2 documentaries going out on that was going to be filmed for Sky before the end of the year, which have now been cancelled with no future date, which is tragic for me. But Hunted, 2 series of Hunted we were supposed to film as well this summer. That's cancelled until next year. So I've got a lot of spare time on my hands. I'm going to hopefully head to, as soon as we can fly again, I'm going to head out and pick up the next 5 legs of the running. So I still will go to the North Pole at some point. I'm booked in to go to Antarctica in December, Greenland in October. But I guess we're just going to wait and see of what pans out. But like everyone else, though, I think you've got to stay positive, but also I think where there's crisis, there are always opportunities, and we've all embraced in this virtual world, the podcasting, the Zoom call. So I'm keeping my radar up for new things all the time and trying to stay positive.
Yeah, so we've moved a lot of our stuff online, and obviously the actual face-to-face teaching of physical intervention just isn't something that can go now. And I've had a lot of people request. I had one this morning where someone said, "Oh, you can come and teach us, just wear a mask and gloves." So like I was trying to get across to him that masks and gloves aren't some magical mythical thing that protects you. There's got to be a risk assessment and a reason for you actually doing it. And I think everyone's geared up to getting back into things, and we're having to make a decision to say, okay, well, yeah, we could probably work our way around the guidance, and we could probably get in a classroom with you. But whilst the sort of death rate, or the R as the government call it, sits where it is, probably the risk of you getting assaulted by not having the physical hands-on training is far less than you actually catching something, spreading something, and killing vulnerable members of the community. So we're having to do a bit of soul searching and say, it's about what we should do, what we ethically should do, not what we're legally allowed to do. I think we've seen that mirrored on the sort of the trips to the beaches and the cars and the people flocking to the countryside as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think, yes, it's about doing the right thing. And I get it, it's very difficult for people as well, because it is, it's changing the way we work, it's changing the way families, the dynamics. I speak to a lot of police officers, and we talk about things like protection and control and restraint and the challenges, and things like domestic violence is higher now than it's ever been, with what's going to happen in the lockdown. And I think, again, when you look at the things that you do, maybe something like workshops or seminars online about this sort of thing as well is interesting, because I think we've just got to approach the world and what's going on in a very different way and try to think differently. But there are a whole host of new challenges that this problem has caused outside of the COVID, but as a result of COVID, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw an increase in the use of soft restraints, just where people were using them as an alternative to cuffs, or people were looking at where they're having to hold people for prolonged periods of time rather than having to go hands-on. They were in a cuff. So as long as that's risk assessed properly, it's actually been working quite well. Online, it's been quite good, because the correctional facilities we support overseas and the forensic hospitals, there's no chance of us getting to Australia anytime soon. So we've put sort of an information exchange online, which we talked about a couple of years ago, and we just said it's not as good as face to face. So we just got a reciprocal agreement now that the trainers over there do some teaching. They send us the video footage for us to assess, and then we can send it back. And it's a reasonable adjustment. Some people might say, oh, you can't learn that way, but what I'd say is, what choice have we got? People need this training. We had an order of 150 kits from Holland the other day. I'm not about to send stuff to people to use in the likes of detention centres or places, because, like you say, you've got the scrutiny of people there for human rights. And if people have got kit or equipment and they don't know how to use it properly, that's when it should be scrutinised. So for us, we've moved a lot of our stuff online. And to be honest, I'm quite enjoying the newness of it, if you like.
No, absolutely. I think so. Yeah, as you say, definitely. It's all right having the kit and equipment, but knowing how to use it correctly and legally, ethically is paramount. And I think, online, I think we're going to see a lot more of it. I think the world will change how the world does business, with meetings, conference calls, training. And I think also, like you say, people are videoing it, so it can be after action reviewed. People can still pick it apart and pick up the learning points, the objectives and things. And actually, when I did my I spent quite a long time with Pearson EdXL doing standards verification overseas, and quite often we would use video evidence for a lot to make sure people were meeting the standards. It wasn't uncommon to film a close protection, vehicle drill or whatever it might be. It's perfectly acceptable in any international training standard.
Yeah, and a lot of the systems of physical restraint or control and restraint, when it comes down to it in a court, when something goes wrong, the court are scrutinising the training manual and they're scrutinising the training videos. So my argument would sort of be, well, if doctors are medically reviewing techniques and courts are making decisions on video evidence, well, why don't we use it? There's so many apps now there's this Facebook portal that follows you around the room, which we've been using. It's been really handy for the mobility of techniques and things. And I think as technology just goes forwards, people are going to be left behind if they're relying on that face to face. And for me, the beauty is I can go back, whereas if I blink, I might miss some of the techniques. Or if I'm having a particularly long day, I might not be able to properly assess somebody. But if I can scrutinise that video in my own time and that footage, it's got to be more conducive.
Absolutely, and I think it's certainly, that sort of strategy is used by military, by law enforcement. And before we go on operations, we have to do things like mission rehearsal exercises, and everything will go into after action review. There'll be filming, there'll be footage, there'll be what people said, and that's so we can learn, because as you say, you blink and you've missed something or you forget it, but actually if it's been filmed, you can go and you can pick it to pieces and make sure it doesn't happen again, and also at the same time pick out what you're doing well so we can share those great lessons. So I think people have to be more open-minded, because the world's changing, and if you don't change with the times, you're going to get left behind.
Yeah, and it's not a high-8 video camera being run around behind a tank anymore. Everybody's got a narrative creating device in the hand. Everybody's got it. And the old sort of saying, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. It might even become, if it's not recorded, did it happen? Because you can write something down, twist it any way you want, but at least if you've got footage or several angles of footage, you can make a better decision.
Absolutely. It's quite funny, because that's what the producers on Hunted always tell us. If it's not been caught on film, it didn't happen, because you've got to be able to show it to,
of course.
show it to the
yeah,
public.
No one wants to watch you writing on a screen, do they?
But yeah, no, but it's definitely it's the future. I think 100%, and we have to find ways to embrace it and sort of get it as part of our lives, because it's things like these virtual quizzes that I've been in loads of quizzes, loads of news interviews. I've done 5 or 6 Sky News interviews in lockdown, and it's all been through Zoom. And you just think, well, why do I spend all this money travelling to centre of London, £400 or whatever on a train and a hotel, when actually we achieved exactly the same sat from my bedroom or whatever.
There's got to be questions asked about that. There's got to be questions about the sheer waste of money for the meetings about meetings we're forced to attend.
Definitely. I think people who work in sort of loss prevention now will be looking at budgets and things. The amount of meetings that we, all of us have flown to in places like, Dubai, Paris, New York, and actually we could have done everything via a Zoom call. It's incredible, really. We probably wouldn't be having the problems with jobs and the economy now if we'd have saved that money.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm relatively new to the maritime sector. My sort of experience was in security, but not at sea. So I sort of got thrown in by picking up a couple of contracts doing training for ship security officers. So I had to go down and jump into a swimming pool and go into this burning house in Liverpool and put breathing apparatus on. It was doing my STCW. It was good. It was fun. It was really out of my comfort zone, if you like. So I've seen a different angle now of working on ships, and I've had to sort of adjust my knowledge and my expertise around that to try and keep learning to see how their laws differ and things like that. How was your experience of maritime? Did you have any experience with having to keep people detained whilst you were on vessels?
So we there was I spent about 5 years working at sea after I left the army as a maritime security sort of advisor, consultant, if you like. And although mainly I was sort of dealing with piracy threat, but there was incidents where we would sort of in a counter-terrorist role. So we would be searching people if people caused any problems while we were in cargo operations. We might have to detain them, put them in a room, and sort of. But again, it was pretty much the same principles because we were all ex-military, so we only knew what we knew, sort of thing. But there was without mentioning any company names. Yeah. I'd not been trained in that before I went on that ship. Even though I was expected to deal with any problems, I'd had no specific training except for what I knew as what was right.
Welcome to private security.
Say again, sorry.
I said, welcome to private security. Get on the ground, no training.
Exactly. It's depending on and where you work in the world and in what role. As you say, it's a bit like in Indians in some parts of the industry, but also at the same time, I like you, I've worked for some great companies who take security risk management and all the things that should come with it very seriously as well. But it's like any industry, you get the good guys and the bad guys, I guess.
Yeah, and if anything's in its infancy, because I loved your first book, Citadel. And it was in its infancy then. It had not kicked off. They were just drafting in people that they thought had the requisite skill sets. And you sort of pretty much jumped in at the deep end, didn't you?
Yeah, it was when I entered the industry in 2009. It was, I have no qualms in saying it was a bit like the Wild West. And, I would get phone calls saying, I can remember making phone calls to say, what do I do with these arms, these weapons? Is somebody going to collect them? I'm going to store them in an armory. And then, the person who owned the security company would say, no, just dump them over the side in the Red Sea. We're not paying for them to go in country. And you look, and the captain's looking at you going, are you for real? Are you serious? And I don't know what the right and wrong is. Who am I to, so these sorts of incidents were quite common. And it wasn't unheard of. And then, you'd get on a ship and you were told that the guys you were working with were ex-Royal Marines or paras, but actually he was a guy who worked on the doors in Blackpool or something. It was a paint and decorator in his 9-to-5 job, and it was the Wild West, but it was a new industry. It was something that was growing. We saw that sort of gold rush effect of we needed more people than we could. The demand was the supply couldn't keep up with the demand, and that was always going to happen. But over time, over the years that came, lots of rules, regulations came in. It became regulated, and things improved. And it's a very different industry, sort of 10 years on than it was then. And I'm pleased to say it's a lot safer and a lot better.
Yeah, I found that from what it's primarily the cruise sector we've been involved with. And I was initially contracted to do a day. Can you do a day's training that includes batons, cups? And I sort of pointed out that you need to have a training needs analysis. We need to have a job specification. There's a lot of legal stuff in here that comes before we get to actually putting the training in. And we found a lot of it. We sort of do a checkpoint escalatory procedure training before we do anything to try and make sure that people are treating passengers correctly. They're getting them lined up so they're in the shade. They're not hungry. They're not getting searched sort of at the dock, on the ship, and then when they go to shore as well. So it really has evolved, and I've enjoyed sort of being a part of it as it's moved forward. So regards the military, did you see any changes in the prisoner handler role from when you started to sort of present day?
I think I was somebody who, I wasn't a specialist in it. I was somebody who was trained in it as part of my secondary role. And there are people like the Royal Military Police who deal with prisoners and detainees every day on operations. And but I think anything to do with the military law enforcement is constantly evolving. And I think one thing that the military and the security forces are really good at is continually analysing what works and what doesn't work. And normally, because they're a government, they're a public sector force, they'll be held accountable for anything that goes wrong. So they have to evolve quite quickly and move quite quickly. But I think in terms of training, the troops that go on operations these days, that they're expected to do what perhaps special forces would have done 20 years ago, whether it's like compound entries, whether it's interrogations, whether the army has advanced so much. And as a young soldier on operations these days, you get a lot of responsibility at a young age. And I don't think you can ever have too much training. And I think it's these extra skills, like how we handle detainees, prisoners, how we treat people. These are all the things that they're almost they're sort of like the soft skills in life, because actually they are what are gonna the things like how you handle a relationship or how you handle a prisoner when that's perceived by the outside world. If you're at a vehicle checkpoint in Basra or the Helmand province, the way you deal with people that you're arresting will have a direct impact on how the rest of the population see you. Whether you have the morals, the values, and you're carrying all the sort of high standards of the British military, or are you just another rogue militant, like no different than the Taliban or Al Qaeda? And you have to demonstrate through positive action that you're doing the right thing, because I've been fortunate enough to go back to places like Iraq and Afghanistan as a civilian, and they have a very different opinion of me, when I'm not wearing a uniform. And we have to win. As a soldier on the ground, you have to win over the hearts and minds of the people, and the only way you can do that is by treating them with the utmost respect. And whether we like it or not, we have to remain professional, even if they are people who have got blood on their hands of our colleagues and friends. We have to. If you start treating those people like they treated us, we're no better than them, and we drop down to their level.
Yeah, and I think that's really what I wanted to tie in, because you see echoes of that across every single sector. So my first job sort of as a young martial artist, I went on to work the doors, and it was always, those bouncers, they'll throw you down the stairs. And then the bouncers would say, don't let the pigs get involved. They'll beat you up and put you in a cell. And it was always this us and them. And it's never been more clear than in a military situation. There's the goodies and the baddies. But as soon as you start moving away from that and saying, look, these conflicts are caused by a variety of different things, usually money or because of dirty black stuff in the ground that's being dug up. We've got to look at how we treat people, because it's not just about how people feel. It's about safety as well. Because if one person disrespects one, we're having a similar thing with the different US police forces as well. There's the child killers, and they'll cause problems, and there's brutality and things like that. And I think for me, it's not about more restraint training. The emphasis should be more on the de-escalation. And as you say, the soft skills, learning how to talk to people, how to de-escalate people, how to win friends and influence people, basically.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think, that, like we said at the start, and something that I learned from you, many years ago, was that, good risk management, good security is done by people with the brain who can think, not by people who got, big muscles or weapons.
Yeah.
And I think that, I found that in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia 2 years ago when I was there, I can honestly say, and I often say to people, that I saw more acts of kindness, humanity, love, compassion than I've ever seen in our own country. And that was from a place that most of our, if I ask somebody, 90% of the UK population, what they know about Iraq or Afghanistan, they would say bombs, bullets, bad people, war,
sand
conflict.
caves.
Yeah, but actually, I've got friends there who are kinder, more compassionate than most of the people I know in our own country. So, but again, we have to consider the media factor in that, and that's as a result of being brainwashed by what we see on a TV or in the newspaper often.
Yeah, which has never been more prevalent at this moment in time.
Yeah, exactly.
So cool. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we go, because I really appreciate you giving your time up, was the book that you and your daughter have just put out.
Yeah, it's been obviously we tried to be as productive as possible in lockdown, and one of the ways with the homeschooling, we had a project about a year ago, and it was to try and learn every flag and every capital city of the world, and she was a lot better at me than it, to be honest. I'm still struggling, and so we decided that it'd be really good fun to put it into a book and actually share what we did with other children, and then it was good timing that we were in lockdown because people were looking for new ideas, and we sent it off and we got it published, and we had a local charity, the Able Foundation, who deal with mitochondrial disease, and they sponsored a couple of thousand copies for the local NHS workers. So all the NHS and the key workers, all their children got a copy of a free book locally, and then. So it was just a good fun project, and actually, I probably learned as much as my daughter did by doing it about interesting facts about these weird and wonderful countries of the world.
Yeah, I think by doing so, people have often said to me, "Oh, I learnt that when I was writing a book, and it sort of never dawned on me." But I think this is the 10th or the 11th podcast I've done since I just thought of it as an idea of something to keep me busy and keep me on the radar whilst I was in lockdown myself. But every person I've spoke to and everything I've done, I really have learned something. I've picked something up new, and I suppose that's what this lockdown's about: just trying to speak to people, find things out, and then see how we can apply them afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you can either sit at home and you can lie in bed watching your Netflix every day, or you can make it productive and learn something new, pick up a new skill, stay in touch with people, and hopefully then you hit the ground running when we get out of this, and you've made good progress. Because I think if you go downhill and you get into those negative routines, it's a slippery slope and it's very difficult to get out of. And that's why I think, staying active, keeping fit, healthy, and keeping the mind busy is really important in these challenging times.
Absolutely, mate. So, what have you got on for the rest of the day? Anything exciting?
So tonight tonight I've got an Instagram live for the Army Cadets where I'm interviewing Johnny Mercer, the politician. He's the Veterans Minister. So I'm interviewing him at 7:00, and then at 8:30 I've got a quiz night hosted by Kay Burley from Sky News. We do every Thursday with lots of interesting people, which is good fun.
Excellent. Well, Jordan, thanks so much for your time, mate. I'm sure we'll catch up soon, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Doug, and keep up the great work, mate. Thank you.
No worries.